I go, I'm putting on. Putting on, putting on. Everywhere I go, I'm putting on. Putting on, putting on. Everywhere I go, I'm putting on. Putting on. Where you from?
Welcome to Popcorn Sports on the Popcorn Entertainment Network. I'm your host, Mike Kyle, and welcome to yet another episode of Why You Should Root for every team in the NBA for the 2018-2019 season. I, of course, am not alone. I am joined here by Joe Mullinax of the Memphis Grizzlies, but he covers the Grizzlies over at GrizzlyBearsBlues.com. Joe, go ahead, introduce yourself. How you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, you set me up pretty nicely there. I'm Joe Mullinax. I am the site manager for SB Nation, the GrizzlyBearsBlues.com, going into my third year doing that. And we have a staff of about 20 guys and gals who do remarkable work helping me cover the team. And we're getting into mid-season form already here. We're one full week through the preseason. The Grizzlies have looked pretty sharp at times, and especially after a 22-60 season, you're excited to get the next one going and hopefully see some brighter days ahead. And it looks like they're on the right track for that. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And you guys can check out the site in the description down below. I'll leave a link there. So my first question for you is, how did you get to cover the Grizzlies ultimately? Because you're in Virginia, so how does that happen?
Well, I lived in Memphis for several years, and when it was decided by my girlfriend at the time, now wife, that she was going to take a job in the Memphis area, I realized I didn't really have any other connections to where I was currently in Richmond, Virginia, or at that time, I should say. And I said, yeah, let's go on an adventure. I haven't really left Virginia at any point in my life, so I thought it'd be a good chance to follow her. I didn't know if she'd be my wife or not at that point. Turned out she was. So it was a good choice by me.
Yes.
But it was kind of one of those low-risk things. If it didn't work, I could always come home, and if it did work, I'd found my wife, and that's a big plus. So we moved to Memphis, and I've always been a big sports guy. We were talking a little bit before we went live. I'm a teacher and a football coach by trade, so I always look for sports teams and sports to help me kind of get used to an area. And obviously the Memphis Grizzlies were the big thing at the time that we were starting to look into moving. It was their first big playoff run against the San Antonio Spurs when they upset them as the 8th seed. The Spurs were the 1, of course, and the Grizzlies beat them, and then they pushed the Thunder with Durant and Westbrook and Harden to the brink and all that kind of fun stuff, and I fell in love with the team. Started writing about them a year or so later. My wife told my girlfriend at the time, now wife, said, hey, you're giving me all these opinions, you're so opinionated, maybe you should just start a blog or something. So I started looking around, and there were a couple of fan blogs at the time. This is 7 or 8 years ago now. There were a couple of fan blogs, but the most popular one the one that I liked the most, was straight out of Vancouver. It was run by a guy named Kevin Lipe, who now works at a local Memphis news site, the Daily Memphian. But anyway, I was one of his last hires before he left. And then over the past 5 or 6 years, I've risen up from a fan poster to a contributor to a writer. I host one of our podcasts, Grizzly Bear Blues Live, which will come back in November. I was named site manager a few years ago, and I'm going into year 3 of that process, running the site itself. Like I said, a ton of great staffers who make me look a lot smarter than I am, and I've had amazing opportunities to cover playoff games and meet with a variety of folks with the Grizzlies organization who have been very kind to us over at GBB. So it's been a wild ride. I've done a ton of things that I never thought I'd get an opportunity to experience because of GBB. And like you said, I live in Virginia now. We moved back a few years ago, but it's my way of kind of staying in touch with Memphis, keeping up with the city that I consider my second home, and obviously following one of my favorite sports teams, the Memphis Grizzlies.
You started off as a rookie, and you worked your way up into a vet. I'm so proud of you, and I just met you about 10 minutes ago. Congratulations, but seriously, that's such a great story, because sports are just such a defining piece of American culture, and really just global culture in general, where
Sure.
it's just the rite of passage, and that's how you make your mark on an area if you're just moving there, or it's how you meet people with similar interests to you. It's just such a very important part of just culture as a whole. And so for that to be your story, I think that's just really unique and really cool. And you're really the epitome of sports.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. And I think that my story is unique in that I started, blogging out of it. But one of the things that's so important about sports, as you kind of alluded to there, is it's a capacity to bring people together from all sorts of different walks of life and different cultures. Memphis is a very diverse area, but even beyond basketball, and beyond the United States, you hear stories recently reported about, games being played in India in the coming years, and in Japan,
Right.
and other areas around the globe. It truly is a global game, something that, American football and other sports maybe struggle with a little bit more than basketball. Basketball is doing a good job of expanding. So it's one of those games that certainly can bring people together. Most sports can, of course, but for me, it brought me to the table because of the players, the stories. I love basketball as a sport, but, it's a lot of the personality that comes along with it that lured me in as well.
Yeah, the NBA is doing a great job of expanding, but let's just centralize now on the Memphis Grizzlies with some general overview of the organization. They joined the NBA in 1995, and they were originally the Vancouver Grizzlies, as you touched on earlier. They moved to Memphis in 2001, and they're called the Grizzlies due to the grizzly bear population in British Columbia up in Canada. And I was doing my research before this, and I found out that they kept the team name because apparently when they moved to Memphis, the Memphis citizens already embraced the team name off the bat, so they didn't even change it. Their colors are navy, light blue, and yellow. 10 playoff appearances, 0 championships, and they play in the Southwest Division with Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, and New Orleans. So just like the organization itself, just like that whole story, I just think is really cool. Because obviously Canada at the time, like I just mentioned, they were in Vancouver. They got stripped of their team and they moved to Memphis, which is I think interesting because Memphis is a predominantly small market, and so to kind of have that, and then you have them already embrace the team before they even almost get there, I think that's just really special.
Well, the thing about Memphis is you're exactly right. It's a very small market. I do believe it's the smallest in the NBA, and they've done a decent job sustaining them. They've been in the top 10 of attendance a few times, and I think on average over their lifespan being in Memphis from 2001 to now, I believe they're 15th or 16th. Don't quote me on that. I might be 1 or 2 off, but they're in the middle of the pack. It's not like even though they're a small market, their attendance numbers are in the toilet. One of the main reasons the team came to Memphis, aside from the basketball side of things, because Memphis is a basketball city,
right,
is that unity that we were talking about. Memphis has a lot of unique issues compared to other cities, racial tensions, things like that, and the Grizzlies were brought in to kind of be a unifier. Now, does the arrival of a professional basketball team eliminate all that? Of course not. But what it does is it creates that depending on how cynical you are, either illusion or connection of civic unity, that does kind of develop, especially in those moments like that playoff series I mentioned earlier, like when the Grizzlies went on their Western Conference Finals run. I was in Memphis during that time period, and it was a pretty powerful time to be a Grizzlies fan, and a pretty memorable time, not just because the team was winning, but because of the way they were winning, the memorable ways that they were doing it. And like I said, the personalities earlier, Zach Randolph, Tony Allen, players that are no longer on the team, but play such an important role, or played such an important role in what the team became in terms of grit and grind and that mentality. That era of basketball is the most successful in the history of that organization. And that's a major reason why I'm a fan and why a lot of those people that are fans now are fans. You have a generation of kids in Memphis that have grown up with the Grizzlies being better than the Memphis Tigers, who's just historically run that town.
Yep.
And now with the hiring of Penny Hardaway as their head coach, they're probably back to being in the mix, if not already more popular. That's a pretty big hire for them. But anyway, point being, there's a generation of kids who grew up with the Grizzlies being the main show in town, and, they're going to reap the benefits of that for years to come in terms of settling a fan base. So whenever somebody says something like, oh, the Grizzlies should move to Seattle or, some other city, they should be an expansion candidate for relocation, it's pretty short-sighted. I mean, the Grizzlies are pretty successful. They were the number one franchise several years ago in ESPN in terms of bang for your buck value and the team being good. 7 straight playoff appearances, nothing to stick your nose up at. I do believe that the Grizzlies are doing a good job in their front office, their business side of things, establishing and creating a footprint that's going to be sustainable for them financially. And Robert Pera, the owner, the controlling owner of the Grizzlies, has, at least publicly, made it very clear that he's interested in being in Memphis for the long haul. So it's a very, very important piece of the Grizzlies, of the city structure at this point, as a fandom, as obviously an economic viability option down in FedEx Forum. Beale Street being right there, so much money from tourism and obviously the revenue from the games. Lots of jobs are connected to the Grizzlies. So they've in the 17 or 18 years they've been in the city, they are definitely making a big economic impact, and it helps in a variety of ways for Memphis and for the fans of the Grizzlies.
Yeah, there was something in there that you mentioned, and I kind of want to use that as a nice segue into what I want to talk about next, and that was how the Grizzlies, throughout their time being in Memphis, they've been predominantly a playoff team. They weren't, unfortunately, they had that great team with Conley, Randolph, Gasol, etc., and they were able to really push it. They were able to push the playoffs very frequently, as you said, 7 straight years, but they were never really able to get over the hump. And as a result of that, you saw that team kind of start to break down, and then you ship guys out one by one. Conley and Gasol being the two left standing. And so that's what happened. So that's what happened what you saw last season, where they went 22-60. They missed the playoffs in the West. They drafted Jaren Jackson Jr. with the 4th overall pick in this year's NBA draft. And last season as a whole was just really chaotic. You had the beef between Fizdale and Gasol, and Chandler Parsons was just all over the place, either injured or just was throwing his own little temper tantrums at times. What can you make of last season?
I try to forget last season, if I'm being honest with you.
Fair. Good. Good for you.
Down year,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that what Grizzlies fans, in hindsight, took for granted was just how much of a vacuum was going to be left in terms of leadership by the departure of Zach Randolph, who signed a 2-year, $24 million contract with the Sacramento Kings. He would have been a fool to not sign that deal. So yep. I'm not mad at Zebo for leaving.
Right.
And then Tony Allen, as you kind of alluded to there, he wasn't a part of the plan. So he just kind of left and was signed by New Orleans, and then he was traded and waived, and, TA's not on an NBA team right now. So it was just kind of time to move on. And when you have two such large personalities, guys, like I said, who helped establish your entire identity, and they're gone all of a sudden, and now you have Marc Gasol and Mike Conley asking them to step up into that role, especially a player like Marc Gasol. That's not really his thing. And you mentioned the beef between him and David Fizdale. They never really clicked. David Fizdale came in and essentially said the Grizzlies hadn't won anything, which is a bold strategy with a group of guys who went through what they went through. The unique thing about Memphis is you have to look at them through a spectrum that's different than most of the other teams in the NBA. Like, for example, when they announced that Zach Randolph was going to have his number retired one day at FedEx Forum, his number as a Grizzly is going to be retired, there was some brushback from people around the NBA, like some national NBA writers saying, what has Zach Randolph done to have his number retired and all that? That just shows that they don't understand what Zebo means to that community on the court and off the court. Same concept here. You might be a national power coach, and David Fizdale, obviously coming from Miami where they won championships, the Big Three era and all that stuff. You come into Memphis and you say that they haven't accomplished anything. Well, success is, it's defined according to the area that you're in. For the Grizzlies, 7 straight years of the playoffs, making the Western Conference Finals with a bunch of misfits that nobody else wanted. Tony Allen, Zach Randolph had a career renaissance. Marc Gasol was a second-round pick, a afterthought in that trade for his brother from Memphis to L.A. Aside from Mike Conley, there were only 2 or 3 first-round picks on the entire Grizzlies roster last season. So to consider what they had been through and the mistakes made by the front office, Chris Wallace, whoever was in charge, to look at all of that and say, oh, my goodness, they have that type of success. You can't come in and expect somebody to just say, oh, yeah, you're right, we haven't won anything. So Marc Gasol had a lot of issues with that. That obviously led to Fizdale's departure. The Mike Conley injury was the biggest issue last year.
Yep.
Without Mike, the team's just not very good, and he only played in 12 games. You mentioned Chandler Parsons, obviously giving a max contract to a guy who hasn't played very well the first 2 years of that contract, hasn't played very often. It is, of course, going to be a point of contention and frustration for fans and players alike. And there was just a lot of things that went wrong in terms of health, in terms of internal tensions. It was kind of a perfect storm of that. Now, the off season that we just went through was actually kind of nice. They reaped the benefits of the bad seasons. 4th overall pick. They get Jaren Jackson Jr., who everybody's very excited about. Obviously, very young, very raw in some ways. But 3-4 years from now, when the team's ready to move on from Mike Conley and Marc Gasol, Jaren Jackson Jr. should be ready to be that guy, that face of the franchise for them, and kind of lead the team. You have the signing of Kyle Anderson, which has looked good for the Grizzlies so far. They signed him away from the Spurs using their full mid-level exception. and he's a unique player. He can do a variety of things, handling the ball, defending multiple positions, 6'9" forward. He fits in really well with that unique Memphis mentality. Obviously, they drafted Javon Carter as well. They signed Sheldon Mack and Omri Caspi. They traded for Garrett Temple. So they, instead of, usually when you see a team struggle the way the Grizzlies did, you see teams choosing to tank, right? The Sam Hinkie trust the process kind of concept from Philly. And if that was the logic, then Marc Gasol would have been traded for something. Mike Conley would have been traded. They would have maybe stretched provisions, Chandler Parsons, gone fully in the tank and said, let's start rebuilding this thing. But they chose to go in the opposite direction, and they've restructured their roster, built around smart, tough, high basketball IQ types of players who can play a variety of positions and do a variety of things, and they're banking on the ability to defend, the ability to execute offense in the half court and slow down the pace as a way to counter the Houston Rockets and Golden State Warriors of the world. They think in a 7-game series, if you mix it up enough and you throw enough different looks at a team like that, you might be able to pick them off. Part of that's probably motivated by the fact the Grizzlies still owe a first-round pick. They owe a pick to the Boston Celtics. In 2019, I believe it's protected 1 through 8. So if Memphis is better than that in their lottery selections, they'll send the pick to Boston. And I think they want to get that pick off their ledger. This draft is kind of looked at as a weaker one coming up, 2019 draft. So I think they're going to try to be as competitive as they can, hopefully make the playoffs. If they don't make the playoffs and yet they still send that pick out to Boston because they're, the 17th or 18th best pick in the league or team in the league, then that'll still be considered a victory because when the time does come to rebuild, whether it's next year, 2 years, 3 years from now, they won't have to owe any other first-round picks and they'll just have the chance to start that process. So in a long-winded way, last season was really kind of crappy, but it's allowed for us to enjoy a team that will almost surely be more competitive in the here and now because they want to maximize Marc Gasol and Mike Conley as long as they're here, and they also are thinking long-term about what they need for first-round picks in the future.
I think the thing that you said there that kind of was making me think a lot was the direction that they want to go for the next few years. Because as you mentioned, a lot of teams at this point right now, they would look at their roster and be like, all right, let's punt, let's move guys, let's ship them out, and then let's kind of just start fresh. And because you have that first round pick that's protected 1 through 8, like you mentioned, it kind of puts you in an awkward spot. You can try and keep that pick, or you can roll the dice and maybe, perform well in the Western Conference and see what you can go from there, maybe giving up that pick in the long run. But don't you think that it's interesting that they chose right now to do that, to kind of like say, let's try and compete in the West when the West is so stacked right now? I mean, you're looking at 12 teams in the Western Conference that could potentially make the playoffs.
No, you're exactly right. And I think that, again, one of the themes of this segment here is the uniqueness of Memphis. J.B. Bickerstaff, when he was hired, and then at the introductions to Jaren Jackson Jr. and Javon Carter when they were drafted, we don't want to be like the rest of the league. We want to be us. Memphis has updated their uniforms and updated their court, and they're the only court in the NBA, if you look at their new home court, that the cut of the wood goes against the grain. So it's kind of one of those identity things. Lots of teams might say, let's just punt and see what we can do down the road. We have guys with money tied up in them now. For better or worse, you can argue if that Mike Conley deal was too much. Marc Gasol has a player option for next season, but he's obviously under contract this year. Chandler Parsons is there another 2 years. And you're not going to get equal value for any of those guys, especially Chandler Parsons. But the numbers in your eyes tell you when you watch them and they're healthy that Mike Conley and Marc Gasol are one of the best duos in the NBA. But nobody really pays attention, in part because they're in Memphis. But if they're healthy, and if Chandler Parsons is healthy, and apparently he is right now, and again, they've upgraded their roster. They have a lot of smart players, both young and old, veteran and rookie, and younger player alike, that can compete. If Minnesota falls apart, which it sounds like they're about to with the trade of Jimmy Butler, probably imminent, and, there's lots of other things in the West that are kind of fluid. Why can't the Grizzlies make the playoffs? Now, people might think that it's a silly goal to be the 7 or 8 seed and get sacrificed to Golden State or Houston, but that's not necessarily how the Grizzlies think. They think they can give those teams a run for their money if they make the playoffs. They just got to get to the dance. And in fairness to them, historically, the Grizzlies have been one of the teams to give Golden State the most trouble. And obviously Golden State has gotten the best of them, but, Memphis has beaten them multiple times in the regular season. If Mike Conley hadn't gotten injured a few years ago, you could easily argue the Grizzlies would have picked off Golden State. I mean, there's a variety of reasons to think that Memphis can at least compete, and they want to give themselves that opportunity. I do think even the staunchest Grizzlies fan needs to be honest about why that logic is. Of course, they love Mike and Mark. They have the money tied up in those guys, so they might as well try. But at the same time, again, the specter of that first-round pick looms. And if you want to be able to draft a James Wiseman or, again, most people agree that the class of 2019 isn't the strongest in the NBA draft. It's a perfect year to try to get that pick to move on. It's very possible that you invite me to come back on this show again next year, and I talk about how Marc Gasol opted out of his player option. They decided to trade away Mike Conley and stretch the vision Chandler Parsons, and now we're in a full-blown rebuild. That option's still on the table, but at least for one more year, they have set themselves up to be in a place where they can compete in the Western Conference for at least a playoff spot. And given all the other options that are on the table, I think that the fans can appreciate that they're trying. If they had just completely punted in a year where they could have Mike and Mark healthy and Chandler as competitive as he could be, if they had just traded all those guys away, I think there would have been some resentment and contempt from the fan base. Moving forward, if Marc Gasol opts out in the summer of 2019, I think there will be more of an understanding if they do decide to move on into that rebuild process. At least they're trying, is kind of the concept here. And they're definitely better than they were even going into last season.
Yeah, I think the thing with that is, you just backed up that case extremely well. Without a doubt, I was just kind of processing all of that as you were, just going through the steps, and it's okay, that makes sense, that makes sense, and that makes sense. And you've mentioned, and we've been talking a lot about just different players on the roster, so I think that's a great way to segue into this year's roster. So Mike Conley, Marc Gasol, Jaren Jackson Jr., the rookie, Parsons, Dylan Brooks, who played well last year. They brought in Kyle Anderson, Ivan Rabb, Javon Carter. Just break down this roster the best you can. Give me some guys you're excited about, and what do you think this roster can ultimately amount into?
Well, the current battles that are interesting in terms of positions, because Conley and Gasol are obviously starters.
Right.
The two guards kind of comes down between Dylan Brooks, who had a good year last year on a bad team. As you mentioned, he was the only rookie to play all 82 games. Arguably the best second-round draft pick of last year's draft. Between him and Garrett Temple, the guy that they traded for from the Sacramento Kings, Temple is a facilitator. Temple can defend multiple positions. He's a little bit better on and off the ball than Dylan is. So it'll be interesting to see who starts in that spot. I think they both will be on the rotation, but just who gets the nod to start games. The 4 is another interesting spot. Michael Green is in a contract year. He's looked good so far. He's one of those pro kind of guys. He's going to show up, play his minutes, do his job, do it well. Rebound well, which is certainly not going to be a strength of the Grizzlies. So he has an important role there. Everybody talks about Jaren Jackson Jr. We mentioned him earlier. Tons of potential. How ready is he going to be in his first year to contribute on a team that's trying to be good? It is kind of a storyline with him. And then at the 3, it's more of a storyline than we thought, because we mentioned Kyle Anderson, also known as Slow-Mo, brought in from the Spurs. Everybody kind of assumed that he would be the starter at the 3. But then on opening preseason, again, noting it's preseason, on the first opening game of the preseason, it was Chandler Parsons, not Kyle Anderson, starting at the 3. Now, Kyle has been out the past couple of games with a heel injury, and hopefully he heals up in the next week or so and is ready for the regular season debut on October 17th. But Chandler Parsons appears to be healthier than he has ever been since he signed that contract back 2 summers ago. And that's a very welcome sign. If Chandler Parsons can be 80% of that guy that was in Dallas and Houston, obviously he's not going to live up to the contract, but that can't be the goal anymore. That can't be the hill that you die on, because you're going to die a pretty painful death. You need to adjust and move the goalposts a little bit and say, okay, I just want him to be a good basketball player for 60-plus games a year. And if he can keep up what he's shown so far, that's very realistic. I think he can do that, and that's going to be a massive addition to the Grizzlies. The player that's kind of under the radar that nobody talks about as much, that's really kind of fascinating to me, is a guy named Marshawn Brooks, who was out of the NBA for years. He was called the next Kobe Bryant in terms of his ability to score and things like that. Falls out of the NBA, plays in China for a few years. The Grizzlies signed him last season to kind of be a spot filler as they tanked the rest of the season away. And he came in and he scored the hell out of the basketball. Extremely impressive scoring, shooting. And, I was one of the ones that wrote him off as, oh, yeah, let's see him do it on a team that's trying to be good. again, it's only the preseason, but in 2 games, in one of them, he was 7 for 7 shooting, 3 for 3 from 3. He might be the main reason that the Grizzlies thought it would be okay to let Tyreke Evans walk for nothing, because this is a guy who can score the basketball and be that microwave scorer off the bench. So the role of Marshawn Brooks, how involved a guy like Conley and Sheldon Mack will be, veteran, contract or veteran minimum signings. Will Sheldon Mack be the main backup point guard? How many minutes will Omri Caspi get? Will the Grizzlies play small ball because they only really have Jaren Jackson as the backup to Mark and JaMychal? Ivan Rabb is the 4th big technically, but he's 6'10". So this is probably one of the smallest Grizzlies teams in terms of actual size that they've had as bigs. It's not like Zach and Kosta Koufos and those guys that were there a few years ago. But at the same time, I mentioned earlier, they're definitely one of the most versatile Grizzlies teams that I can remember. Multiple facilitators, multiple shooters, multiple guys that can rotate and switch on defense. And, Jaren Jackson is a great example. He defended James Harden and Chris Paul off of switches in their preseason game the other night. Obviously didn't go very well for Jaren, but the fact is, 2 years ago or even last year, the Grizzlies didn't necessarily have a roster that's conducive to that. But now they're in a place where they can experiment and try different things to make themselves more versatile on both ends of the court.
Yeah, that's just incredible analysis off the bat. I feel like you just said something about every player potentially that's going to be in the rotation this year, which is your job. So you're doing your job pretty well. The player I want to talk about, and I know you just kind of mentioned him a little bit there, is Jaren Jackson Jr. Because in Summer League, he looked legit, and you just said he had a little bit of a rough go this past week. But what do you think the ceiling for this kid is, man?
It's unlimited. I think when you saw the NBA GMs put out their annual survey and say, in 5 years, the 2 players from this draft that are going to be the best are DeAndre Ayton, who went number 1 overall, and Jaren Jackson Jr., that kind of tells you the ceiling. I think this guy can be an all-star. This guy can be a MVP-type player once he figures it out. Now, he still has a ways to go to figure it out.
Yep.
He was the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year last year without the ability to stay on the court for an extended period of time. He had real foul troubles in the Big Ten, and that has kind of shown itself with the Grizzlies. He fouled out at one of the preseason games, but not before. He went 6 for 6 shooting and hit a 3, and he's a remarkable talent, but he's extremely raw, and how quickly he comes along will determine how good the Grizzlies can be. If he is able to, by Christmas, to be a starter next to Marc Gasol, allowing for JaMychal Green to be kind of a 6-man big, playing both the 4 and the 5, getting 20 to 25 minutes a night, imagine how much more dangerous they'll be to have a player with the defensive acumen of Jaren Jackson Jr., the length, the ability to space the floor, run the floor. It's all going to come down to his development. Now, Memphis has to be smart. To the credit of the front office, they've rebuilt this roster without sacrificing the future. I think they figured it out that they can't do that anymore. They have to start thinking about a world beyond Marc Gasol and Mike Conley, and that's part of why Jaren Jackson Jr. is here. They can't rush him. It can't be something where he's thrown to the wolves and his confidence gets crushed and he fades into the background. They have to develop him properly, and I think they understand that. And when he does get his opportunity in that way, he'll be ready. But he's a guy who can do everything you need him to do. He can shoot. He's shown the ability to dribble a little bit and facilitate some. Obviously, that's still an area of the game that needs to grow. But the tape that you saw of him at Michigan State as a defender, it's all legit. This kid can play. And I was hesitant on the pick. I was a big Luka Doncic guy. I was interested in trading back once Doncic was off the board. But I will tell you this, he, just in the limited amount of time he's had, the draft was in June, so 4 months, he's made a believer out of me. Maybe not immediately, but that's a kid 2-3 years from now, like I said, when the time comes to move on from Mark and Mike, the next star of the Grizzlies is going to be Jaren Jackson Jr., and I think he, right along the lines of a Kristaps Porzingis, a Joel Embiid, Karl Anthony Towns, those big unicorn-type players that are revolutionizing the NBA, he can be that for Memphis, no doubt.
I think the benefit that Jaren Jackson Jr. has this year is that he's going to be playing behind Marc Gasol, who's just one of the best big men in the NBA and just such a professional.
Right.
And so when you are limiting his minutes, but you're putting an all-star ahead of him, it's just going to make that process for Jaren Jackson Jr. to develop so much easier. I kind of compare it to Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes, of the Kansas City Chiefs. You know, they had Alex Smith play all last season while Mahomes was a rookie. Learn from Smith for the year, and then you throw him in next year.
No, I think that's a good example. And the unique thing about Jaren Jackson Jr. is I agree with you that Jackson is probably going to be the 5 long term. So whenever Mark is gone, that'll be Jaren Jackson replacing him. But the good thing about Jaren is he's so athletic that he can play the 4.
Right.
So
Yep.
it'll be Jermichael Green, who in the more immediate term, he will be replacing. Because it looks like Jermichael's time with the Grizzlies is probably done after this year unless he signs for less as a free agent, which if I were Jermichael, if I got a better deal, I wouldn't do that. So it looks like Jaren in the short term will probably be the replacement for Jermichael, but in the long term, I agree with you completely. He's going to be a 5 in the NBA, and you know whether it's a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, whatever it is, depending on Marc Gasol's situation, he'll be the replacement there. But the good news is he can play either of those big spots, and that's one of the reasons he really kind of fits naturally in as a 6-man reserve kind of big in this first season. He can play alongside both Mark and Jermichael, and they won't really miss a beat.
Exactly. Extremely well said once again. I want to shift gears now to the fan base, the fun, the culture surrounding the Memphis Grizzlies. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but obviously with you being in the Memphis Grizzlies Twitter scene and all of that, and you know having your time in Memphis, you have both sides of the spectrum. You have the in-city side where you know how the fans think there, but then you also have the social media side, which is where you can you get the collective across the country, maybe even around the world as well. So kind of break that down for me. Maybe what's your favorite part of Memphis Grizzlies Twitter, and then what did you like and what did you notice about the fans in Memphis specifically?
Well, what I've noticed about Memphis, whether it be the Twitter scene or whether it be the city itself, is they love basketball.
Right, yep. That's what I have in my notes. I have that exactly in my notes.
Even when the Grizzlies aren't in the playoffs, like last year, you check the ratings for the NBA Finals the next day, and always in the top 5 in terms of market share for ratings is the Memphis market. Memphis just loves basketball. They love the game. They're very knowledgeable about it, very passionate. As with any fan base, there's a segment that's a little bit ignorant in terms of their understanding of how personnel moves work or something like that. But that's not a Memphis thing. That's an NBA thing. That happens everywhere. I would say pound for pound, they're one of the most passionate and one of the most knowledgeable fan bases there is. There's a unique set of fans in terms of bloggers like me. That kind of community exists. Obviously, most powerful or influential online. But the Grizzlies do a great job kind of helping that along, encouraging people to follow the team in whatever way they want. Grizzlies Twitter is a passionate place. There are a lot of characters, a lot of different types of ways of enjoying the team, appreciating the team. Of course, Zach Randolph and Tony Allen are iconic, both in the city and online, and that sort of thing. But now that they're gone, people love Mike Conley, they love Marc Gasol. Essentially, when it comes to the city of Memphis, if you show love for them, they'll love you back. Memphis gets a bad rep in a lot of ways for a lot of things that some are in their control, and the city just needs to be better. And there's other things that are out of their control, and it's kind of an unfair criticism of the city. But if you show love for Memphis and you show that you care about the city and you want them to achieve and do well, and you want to give back to them, they'll give themselves to you wholly, and they'll run through a brick wall for you to defend you. And, Zach and Tony are a great example of that. Same thing with Mark and Mike. It's really an amazing place. I tell people that they look at you funny when you say that you lived in Memphis and you loved it. It's a different spot. It's a different type of town, but it's a hardworking town. It's a town that knows it has issues, that knows it has problems, wants to try to improve them, has taken pretty drastic steps the past 10 years or so to try to grow the city, to try to make it a better place. And, the rise of Memphis as a city kind of on the up and up has also kind of coincided with the rise of the Grizzlies. And that's another reason why the connection is so strong. It's two entities, the city itself and the organization, both trying to help each other out and grow at the same time, with each other. It's really an organic, symbiotic relationship that you don't usually see in professional sports. And I think that's one of the things that makes the Grizzlies and their ties to Memphis so unique.
There were two things that you just said that I want to touch on. And the first one is I can't believe that you somehow maneuvered pound for pound within that. I feel like like you just pulled like the Allen Iverson card. Like Allen Iverson is pound for pound the best point guard in the NBA. Blah blah blah, whatever. But the other thing is, what do the Grizzlies mean to that community? Because you touched on it a little bit, but you didn't fully go in there, and I want you to go there.
What don't they mean? I mean, it's something that, again, the Memphis Tigers, I think, will always be first in the hearts of many because they've been there for a while. There's that generational fandom. But the Grizzlies are close, and they're starting to build that generational fandom kind of concept, from fathers to sons and mothers to daughters down and down the line. That's where you get people. That's where you pull them in. Like, for example, I'm still a fan of the Washington Redskins for no good reason other than my father was and my grandfather was before him. It's a generational fandom thing. If I didn't believe that I had it in my blood to be a Redskins fan, I would have come to that dumpster fire years ago. They're a terrible organization. But they, I love them. I can't help but let go, or I can't let go. I just love them too much, and I apologize to my children for giving them the fandom. They can listen to this 20 years from now and hear me apologize to them. But the Grizzlies are in that spot, and there's so many memories. Zebo skipping off the court after closing out the Clippers, the chokes of Blake Griffin, I'll beat your ass. And it sounds funny to say that. You're like, oh, that's a memory to you? Again, Memphis is a different spot. The genuine article that was Zach Randolph, the passionate tenacity that was Tony Allen, the skill that Mike Conley and Marc Gasol played the game with, it all just came together so organically. Grit and grind wasn't something that some PR person came up with in some office in downtown Memphis. That was from a speech after a game that Tony Allen gave about what it meant to play against Kevin Durant. It was after a game that he shut down Kevin Durant. And he said it was all heart, grit, grind. And it all kind of came together so perfectly. No one could have scripted it. A player like Tony Allen, a player like Zach Randolph getting the second and third chance that he did in Memphis, Mike Conley, Marc Gasol, the way the roster was constructed, the issues that the city was going through. I mentioned that 2011 season. There was flooding in the city. Massive floods. The city was flooded. It all just kind of worked out so perfectly. And the personalities, the people, they all kind of bought into something bigger than themselves. And I have not seen that in professional sports in my lifetime. I'm sure there's places that have had something similar to that, but in my life experience, being a DC sports fan and then moving to Memphis, I have not, in a professional sports setting, experienced what I experienced when I lived in Memphis. And that is the best word I can use to describe it is it's organic. It's real. It's not something, like I said, that was contrived to be put on a towel to be waved at a game. It was real for the people that experienced it. It was real to the players. They lived it. And that is what makes fandom of the Grizzlies so unique. It's not just something that you feel like it's passed down through a generation. If you experienced it, you know it was real. It wasn't something that was created by some business. It was a real feeling and a real kind of moment, and that sticks with you. That's one of the powers of sports when you're able to experience that kind of thing. It stays with you your whole life.
No, to everybody listening, it's not dusty in here. I promise it's okay to cry. Like, right now, you have me, like, I'm ready to cry. That's beautiful. That's the only way I can describe it. That was beautiful, and the only way for me to possibly top that is to say right now you have 30 seconds to pitch anybody why they should be a fan of the Memphis Grizzlies this season. Go ahead.
The Memphis Grizzlies are an organization that's in transition. All the nice things that I just said, it's not really there anymore, if I'm being honest. It was a memory that I get to hold on to because I lived it. But they're a fun team to watch. Marc Gasol and Mike Conley are still there. They're going to be different. If you want something that's different from what the Houston Rockets do, from what Golden State does, the NBA, just like lots of sports, it's a copycat league, but the Grizzlies are going against the grain. Everybody else is zigging. They're going to zag. They're going to play a different style of basketball, a half-court style. They're going to use length. They're going to use their versatility, multiple facilitators. They're just going to play a different way from most teams, and they're hoping that that's going to keep them competitive. I think it will. I think they've made some good moves. Whether or not it results in the playoffs, I'm not sure about that. It'll come down to how the Western Conference shakes out. But they're going to be worth watching again. This isn't a team that's thrown in the towel, decided to tank. They're trying to be as competitive as they can, and I think that deserves the respect of people. You know, it's easy to kind of throw it in and tank and move on. They're trying to hold on and get the most out of the guys that's grown in their system, and I respect them for it. So I think that's a great reason to watch the Grizzlies. They're going to be different, and it's from the top down. They're really trying to be unique in the NBA.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Joe Mullinax. You can follow him on Twitter at Joe Mullinax. That is JoeMullinax. He covers the Memphis Grizzlies over at grizzlybearblues.com. Joe, thank you so much for coming on. You got anything else to plug?
No, we have great podcasts, Core 4 podcast, 3&D podcast. We have tons of great coverage going on over at grizzlybearblues.com. Like I mentioned before, I have an amazing staff who makes me look a lot better and smarter than I am. So make sure you're following us at SBN Grizzlies. We're going to have tons of great Grizzlies content all season long. And thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate coming on the show.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it. This was really fun. Hey, if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. We're doing this for every team in the NBA, so be sure to stick around for that. And with that, we'll see you next time.